Okay, I am testing this out again. I turn this on and I see that we're doing. How's the day going?
My day's going great. Thanks for asking.
Okay.
How about you? How's your day going?
My day is going pretty good. Okay, let's exchange IDs.
Okay, in this situation, it's important to remember your rights. You have the right to remain silent under the Fifth Amendment. If an officer asks for ID, depending on your state's laws, you may need to provide it if you're driving or if they've lawfully detained you. Ask calmly if you're being detained, and if not, if you're free to go.
Okay, the officer is telling me that I am trespassing on the property and he wants to see my ID.
Remain calm and respectful. You can ask the officer to clarify the nature of the trespassing complaint. If you're in a state that requires you to provide ID upon an officer's request, you may need to comply. However, you can state clearly that you do not consent to any searches, keeping your Fourth Amendment rights in mind. If you're not being detained, you can politely ask if you're free to leave.
Okay, I want to know who the officer is. They only told me that they work for the Wexford Sheriff Department, and that's it.
You have the right to know the identity of the officer. Politely ask for their name and badge number. You can say, "Officer, may I please have your name and badge number?" They are usually You're welcome. If you have any more questions or need further assistance, feel free to ask.
Can you find the sheriff policies for Wexford County, Michigan, and find if the policies say that they have to identify themselves?
I'm unable to search the internet for that information. However, you can try contacting the Wexford County Sheriff's Office directly or checking their official website. They might have their policies available online.
Okay, can you quote me the Michigan statute on trespassing?
Sure. Under Michigan law, trespassing is generally covered under Michigan Compiled Laws, Section 750.552. It states that a person shall not enter or remain on another's property without lawful authority after being forbidden to do so by the owner or occupant.
Okay.
Violation can
Okay,
no problem.
I'm at a library and I'm being told that I'm being trespassed from it just because it's closed.
If the library is closed and you've been asked to leave, it's important to comply to avoid a trespassing issue.
I'm not inside the library. I'm just in the parking lot. That's it.
Got it. If you're in the parking lot and the library is closed, the staff or security may still ask you to leave as it's private property. It's best to comply and find another location to avoid any issues.
Okay, so if the library is private property, who are you saying a private person owns it?
Sorry for the confusion. While libraries are public spaces, the property is managed by the library or the local government. They have rules about the use of their... No problem.
Okay.
If you have any other questions,
yes, okay.
Feel free to ask.
Excuse me. Is the government private or public?
The government is a public entity.
Okay, so how is the library still a private property if it's owned by the government?
I see what you mean. While public libraries are government-owned and serve the community, they can set rules for the use of their property. When they're closed, the property, including...
How should they communicate that to the public that uses the property then? What is reasonable to let me know? If I don't see any signs and suddenly a cop comes and tells me that I have to leave, what warning is reasonable to know ahead of time?
That's a fair question. Ideally, there should be visible signs indicating hours of operation and any restrictions on the use of the property. If there are no signs, it can be confusing. In such cases, a verbal request from staff or law enforcement to leave the premises serves as a warning. It's always good to ask for clarification if you're unsure.
Okay, yeah, without any warning, I just have a policeman that comes up to me who doesn't tell me what their name is. They just tell me that they're from the Wexford Sheriff Department. They tell me that I'm trespassing because the library closed an hour beforehand, and it doesn't seem fair to me. What rights do I have to stand on here?
In this situation, you have the right to ask for the officer's name and badge number. You can calmly explain that you weren't aware of the closing time and that there were no visible signs. While you should comply with the request to leave to avoid further issues, you can later address your concerns with the Sheriff's Department about the lack of notice or signage.
But often the Sheriff's Department doesn't reciprocate communication. They won't give any feedback. Often that happens a lot. I would just be throwing sand in the wind.
I understand your frustration. When direct communication doesn't work, consider documenting the incident in writing and sending a formal complaint to the Sheriff's Department.
Okay.
This creates a record of your concerns.
What if the Sheriff's Department is not very responsive? Is there another level I can go above them?
If the Sheriff's Department is unresponsive, you can escalate your complaint to the county board or the county executive's office. They oversee the Sheriff's Department and may be able to address your concerns.
Okay.
Additionally,
the deputy wants to give me a ticket or a warning. He's trespassing me from the library property for a year, and he wants to see my ID to do that. Do I have to hand over an ID, or is it good enough just to tell him my name?
in Michigan, if an officer is issuing a ticket or a formal warning, you are generally required to provide identification. It's best to comply by showing your ID to avoid further complications.
What is the bare minimum for identifying myself? Do I have to give them a blood sample?
No, you definitely don't need to provide a blood sample. The minimum requirement for identifying yourself typically includes giving your full name, date of birth, and if requested by law enforcement, a valid ID.
Okay, is the officer required to tell me their date of birth?
No, officers are not required to provide their date of birth.
Okay, so why am I required to give my date of birth?
You're usually asked for your date of birth to verify your identity accurately.
And they can ask, but they don't. I mean, is that in Michigan? Is that in Michigan law that says that I have to tell my date of birth?
Yes, under Michigan law, if you're being issued a citation or are lawfully detained, you are required to provide accurate information, including your date of birth.
Okay, what's Michigan statute? Can you give me the numbers here? What Michigan statute says that?
In Michigan, providing false information to a police officer.
Okay, it's not false information. I'm asking what statutes in Michigan says that I have to. They're the compiled list. What in Michigan says that I have to give my date of birth? Give me the number here.
I understand. While there's no specific Michigan statute that explicitly states you must provide your date of birth, it's implied under laws regarding providing identification.
Okay, do you understand that I have Fourth Amendment rights?
Absolutely. You have the right under the Fourth Amendment to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures.
Okay, and that involves not having to give my date of birth.
The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, but it doesn't exempt you from providing basic identifying information during a lawful stop.
Okay, so then a cop must give me their date of birth as well.
Actually, law enforcement officers aren't required to provide their date of birth.
Okay, what makes it so a law enforcement officer is not required then?
Law enforcement officers operate under different legal obligations and
Okay,
responsibilities.
what is that legal obligation? What's the statute? What's the law? What's the rule that they're operating under that doesn't require them to give me their date of birth?
There isn't a specific statute that requires officers to provide their date of birth.
And is
Their
there
obligation.
is there a specific statute that protects officers from having to give me their date of birth?
There isn't a specific statute that protects officers from providing their date of birth. Rather, it's standard practice and protocol. Officers are required to provide their name and badge number as identification, which is sufficient for accountability and follow-up.
And me telling just my name is sufficient as well, right?
In most situations, providing just your name may not be sufficient when law enforcement is issuing a citation or needs to verify your identity.
Okay, so how is it that law enforcement gets extra protections from having to give their date of birth over me?
It's not so much about extra protection as it is about different roles. Law enforcement officers are public officials with duties and responsibilities, including identifying themselves by name and badge number. As private citizens, our legal obligations in interactions with law enforcement are different, requiring us to provide certain information such as our name and, when required, additional details like date of birth or ID.
Okay, how do you figure there is a difference between only giving the name and then all of a sudden I have to give a date of birth as well? Are the different circumstances? Can you have any examples of the different circumstances involved where I only have to give my name compared to I have to give my name plus date of birth?
Sure. If you're asked for your name casually, say during a conversation with an officer or as a witness to an incident, just providing your name might be enough.
What if I want to know?
However,
What if I ask them their name and they won't tell me their name?
if an officer refuses to provide their name, you can calmly and politely ask again, emphasizing that you would like it for your records. Officers are generally required to identify themselves by name and badge number when asked. If they still refuse, you can note the time, location, and any other identifying details about the interaction for a later complaint.
Okay, so what's the difference? What situations require me to give my date of birth?
Situations that typically require you to provide your date of birth include when you're being issued a citation, such as a traffic ticket, or during a lawful detention where an officer needs to verify your identity.
Okay, so is an officer violating my Fourth Amendment rights when they're asking for my date of birth?
No. Asking for your date of birth during a lawful stop or when issuing a citation is not considered a violation of your Fourth Amendment rights.
So is it not considered a violation of their Fourth Amendment rights as well if I ask them for their date of birth? I can ask an officer for their date of birth as well, right?
You can ask an officer for their date of birth, but they are not required to provide it.
But you cannot tell me what rule, statute, or law protects the officer from having to give me. Well, that's the Fourth Amendment, I suppose. Okay.
Yes. You're welcome. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask.
So an officer does not have to give me their date of birth, but I have to give them my date of birth. That's what you're saying?
Correct. Officers aren't required to give their date of birth. but you are typically required to provide yours during certain law enforcement interactions.
What's the limit here? What does the Fourth Amendment protect me from then? Do I have to give them my social security card number?
The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, ensuring your right to privacy. You are not required to provide your social security number during routine interactions with law enforcement, such as traffic stops or when being issued a citation. The requirement is usually limited to your name, date of birth, and sometimes a valid form of identification, like a driver's license.
Okay, so I don't have to give my social security number to an officer then, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
You do not have to provide your...
Do I have to tell the officer where I live?
If an officer is issuing a citation or conducting a lawful investigation, they may ask for your address. Providing your address in this context is generally required. However, you don't have to volunteer this information if it's not relevant to the situation. If you're unsure, you can ask why they need the information.
So I have Fifth Amendment rights then. I could stay silent when they ask me that question.
Yes, you have the right to remain silent under the Fifth Amendment.
So if they ask me for my date of birth, I can remain silent on that question, right?
If an officer is issuing a citation or conducting a lawful investigation, providing your date of birth may be required, and choosing not to provide it could lead to further legal complications.
So being silent is illegal? Pleading the Fifth Amendment is illegal?
No, remaining silent is not illegal, and you have the right to plead the Fifth Amendment. However, in certain situations, such as when an officer is issuing a citation, you may be legally required to provide certain information, like your name and date of birth.
So what if I didn't speak English? What if I didn't understand the language? Then am I illegal if I don't understand the question?
If you don't understand English well or at all, you're not doing anything illegal by not responding. Law enforcement should provide assistance, such as an interpreter, to ensure you understand their questions and any legal requirements. Your rights still apply, and not understanding the language does not make you guilty of anything.
So do you have any case law or statutes that explain why I have to tell my name and date of birth for a citation? Can I get I can get arrested for not giving my date of... Are you saying I can get arrested for not telling my date of birth?
If you're being lawfully detained or issued a citation and refuse to provide your date of birth, it could lead to further legal complications, which might include arrest in certain circumstances. Laws can vary by state and situation, so it's generally advisable to comply with requests for basic identification information during such interactions.
Okay, but the officer does not have to comply by telling their first and last name and their date of birth, and they won't get in trouble with any lawful charges, right? Oh, all right. I guess I might have I lost the internet. Okay.